My name is Evelyne Billingslea, and I'm with Dell Consulting Group. I have the pleasure of introducing the presenter for today, Ms. Vanessa Mathews. Before we start today's workshop, it's being sponsored by New Atlantic Contracting. So we want you to pause for a second and take a look at the video for a little information about their company.
Hello, I'm Grady Dwiggins with New Atlantic Contracting. New Atlantic is an employee-owned company with a strong history of MWSBE participation in all project delivery methods. New Atlantic is fortunate enough to have been part of multiple award-winning projects related to workforce diversity. We are always looking to help create opportunity for MWSBE firms. We've led multiple sessions at the Contractors College and State Construction Conference, assisting MWSBE firms with the pre-qualification process in order to access state-funded projects. New Atlantic is a constant presence at events like Charlotte MED Week because we believe that great teams build great projects. We're always looking for new teammates and hope that events like this continue to provide opportunities for us and for you to move forward together.
Vanessa Mathews is the founder and chief resilience officer of Evelyne Advisors. Evelyne helps business leaders to prepare for, respond to, and recover from disruptions and specializes in crisis management and business continuity. Vanessa's breadth of experience in emergency management, crisis preparedness, and risk management equip Evelyne to support their customers to include property managers, universities, international and intermodal logistics firms, retailers, the healthcare industry, and athletic associations. Please join me in welcoming Vanessa Mathews.
Hey, good morning. Good morning. It's glad to see everybody and excited to be here for another Med Week. As Evelyne mentioned, my background is in Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and as a company, myself and the Evelyne Advisors have been working with a number of organizations across multiple industries pre-COVID-19 and in the midst of COVID-19. And so what we've been seeing is some of the concerns around how companies are having to respond to supply chain disruptions, whether it be not being able to get products to your stores, or some of the dependencies that we have in our businesses around key vendors and suppliers that we rely on. We're seeing a lot on communication and planning and the importance of those things pre-crisis so that in the middle of the crisis, you and your team can execute effectively. And we're also seeing challenges in terms of how companies are being able to manage the public health concerns from COVID-19. So today you guys are in for a treat. We're going to be talking about crisis leadership for high growth businesses. Whether you are considered a small business determined by SBA that has high growth potential, or whether you are a middle market company that also has high growth potential, we want to focus this conversation on growth and just thinking through some of the things that we're currently seeing in the market today. So here's a high-level recap of the three things we're going to talk about today. Number one, we're going to start with assessing the state of businesses, and we'll do an opening poll to get a feel for who you guys are on the call today. Second, we're going to talk about actionable insights so you can plan for recovery. So you probably, unless you're in the Homeland Security or emergency management or physical security business, these words, essential workforce, recovery, response, they may not be words that you and your leadership team have been accustomed to using outside of 2020. And so today, I want to give you some perspective on when you hear the word recovery, what does that mean, number one? And then number two, what is your responsibility from a business owner perspective? And then the last thing we'll do today is we're going to walk through an example of some form of an issue or a crisis or a concern you may have in your business, and walk through our 5-step crisis response guide that Evelyne Advisors has created to apply to any form of a crisis. So today's session will be interactive. I don't believe our breakout feature is working today, so I encourage you guys to get involved in the chat. I will definitely be watching that to check the engagement. And then also towards the end of today's session, you will be able to download the 5-step crisis response guide. So you can have it available to you and apply it to any concern or challenge that you're having in your business. And then towards the end of our session, I'll provide you with an opportunity to connect with me one-on-one, and we can discuss any of your goals. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with an opening poll, and we will kick off that poll. All right, so you guys have a poll in place, and there's about 5 questions. So we can see this in real time, and then we'll share the results. So the first question just wants to get a feel for what is the size of your business from an employee perspective. So you guys can fill that in. It looks like we have about 27 attendees, so I'll give you guys a second to go ahead and fill that in. Second question is, what is the size of your business in terms of revenue? Third question is, where are you located? Fourth question is, what industry are you in? And then the last question is, how has your business adjusted to COVID-19? So we have about 7 people. We'll try to get it up to at least half before we cut off the poll. There we go. All right, got about 50% that have voted. Give you about 10 more seconds. %, awesome, thank you. 55%, we might be able to get there. Okay, so we're at 59%, pretty good number. I'm gonna go ahead and hit end poll. And share results. So you guys should be able to see that. So what is the size of your business? So the majority of us on the call today do not have employees, we have contractors, and then that's followed up by 5 employees or less at 19%. So that's really good insight. The size of our business in terms of revenue, about 56% of us are less than $250,000, followed by 19% of us that have businesses between $1 million and 1 million to 3 million. Number 3, where is your business located? So about 88% of us are in Charlotte, as I figured, followed by North Carolina statewide, and then the Southeast US. Industry, 56% of us are in professional services, with 13% of us in construction. I'm not surprised, but glad to see it. And then number 5, how is your business adjusting to COVID? So the number 1 is we are still trying to survive and pivot at 63%, followed by 31% of COVID has been great for business. And 6%, I'm not sure we will make it. Awesome. All right, so that helps to give a lot of perspective for where you guys are in response to everything that's been happening with COVID-19. So thank you for that. So today we're going to talk about the current state, or we'll kick off our conversation by discussing the current state of high growth businesses. And so what I did was I took a look at the middle market indicator from the National Center for the Middle Market. And what the middle market indicator is it's a quarterly business performance update and economic outlook survey that's conducted amongst 1,000 C-suite executives from companies that have revenues between 10 million and $1 billion. So one of you might say, well, we're nowhere near that. That's fine. This is used as an indicator to help you think about how are other high growth businesses looking at the impacts of COVID-19 and how can that inform the things that you're doing in your business. So this is not to compare you, this is just to help to provide you some analysis so that you can be informed. And so what's good to know about the businesses that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes is that the middle market is nearly about 200,000 plus US middle market companies. And so a middle market is, again, 10 million between 1 billion in revenue. And they typically make up about 1/3 of the private sector and the GDP in America. They typically employ about 44 million people across the United States. And these businesses also outperformed throughout the financial crisis by adding an additional 2.2 million jobs between the years of 2007 and 2010. They are diverse in sector as well as geography. And they are comprised of private, family-owned, proprietorships, you name it. So just to kind of give you some perspective of that. And so the reason why this is important is because the health of these businesses and their respective outlook also serve as a solid indicator for the greater US economy as a whole. Some of these businesses may be your suppliers, they may be your customers, they may be your vendors. So we all are in this together in terms of how the performance will look. So there was a couple of things that I wanted to share with you through reading some of the reports from the middle market indicator. Number one was that 24% of middle market companies have added jobs this year versus the 55% that they added in 2019. So that's almost basically a 25% difference of jobs that have not been added in 2020. So why is that important? Well, if you take a look at our local governments, right? How do governments make money? From a business perspective, when we create jobs and when we create revenue, local government makes money. Well, what happens if the businesses are not creating jobs and we're having a hard time generating revenue? What's the ripple effect within our local communities, let alone the national impact that has on our national economy as well as the global economy? So significant drop in jobs since 2019. The second thing that I thought was pretty interesting is that 42% of companies believe their costs will rise or stay the same. And as a business owner, no one wants to hear that your costs are going to rise if your revenue is also not going to increase. And so we'll come back to this a little bit, but there's another survey that I'll show you where it talks about some of the financial concerns that businesses, both small and medium-sized businesses, have had as a result of COVID-19. And the last one here is about the leadership confidence in our local economy as well as the global economy. So overall, executives have expressed their lack of confidence in the local economy and the national economy. And this year, it fell to a record low. So the concern is that people are less confident in our ability for the economy to recover, both from a local government perspective and from a federal perspective. And there's so many things that can be a part of that. It can be issues with how we've handled the pandemic. It can be concerns from a leadership perspective. It can be a number of different things, but it's just important to kind of think through if some of the middle market firms and the leadership is concerned about the economy as a whole and how we're going to recover, then how are you rethinking about that or reshaping those thoughts for your own business? Another thing that I thought was pretty important through this report was the discussion about how these organizations are investing their dollars. So middle market executives as a whole are a bit more cautious. They prefer to hold their cash versus investing it back into the business. So that right there is a learning opportunity. We've seen that many small businesses have had a lot of financial challenges when it comes to really managing business as a whole, whether it's access to capital or whatnot. And then COVID-19 has further shined a light on some of the challenges that were already existing. So if you think about a middle market executive and they're approaching investments cautiously and they're holding on to cash, then for you as a small to mid-sized business, how does that help you rethink about your approach for your business? Are you holding on to cash? Are you spending cash? What's a what can you do to kind of look at how other people are managing this crisis to help you think about it for your own business? A survey went out to these executives, and if given one extra dollar, 70% of them said in 2019 that they would put it to work for their business. So they would reallocate those dollars. But this quarter, only 52% are willing to put that money back into the business. So again, a difference in about 25% in terms of, am I going to take the money that we have as profit and reinvest it back into the business, or am I going to hold it for cash? For those leaders that are going to invest those dollars and not hold it, what that breakdown looks like, as you can see on the chart, 14% will go towards information technology, which makes sense. We're in the middle of a pandemic. And even my customers are saying, if you can provide me data and digital transformation, then you get approved for pretty much anything. If your solution or your product doesn't give me data, then I'm not buying it, right? So just kind of thinking about what are the needs of our customers and where should we be investing our dollars. So again, the top place where they are investing, if they do choose to invest, 14% are putting their dollars towards information technology. The second place that they are investing, you'll see that 11% on the graph, that is for a new plant or equipment. So they're making capital investments in plants or equipment or a facility. And then of the 48%, so if you see the 32% on the chart, that those are folks who are holding cash. And then the 16%, 2/3 of those will hold cash for 1 quarter to anticipate future investment needs. So again, just kind of give you a bit of a framework for how people are choosing to invest their dollars and what they're planning to invest in it. As my business coach always says, follow the money. So as a business owner, how does this help you to kind of think about what changes are happening within the market and what are you doing to make sure that you can meet those specific needs and fall in alignment to where executives and companies are planning to spend their dollars. So a little bit about current state and high growth businesses. Something else I thought was pretty interesting was they gave a short-term and long-term view for the next 3 months versus the next 12 months. And so they kind of started out with some of the internal challenges that businesses are facing. And so for us, ironically, at Asfalis, our internal challenges have probably been more so from a cost perspective and talent management, whereas some of their challenges may be a little bit more business focused in some areas that we may not have some of those concerns. So again, utilize this as a framework to say, okay, well, what are some of the internal challenges that we may be going through within our own business? And then how does that compare to some of the external challenges that these middle market companies talked about? So for them, it's COVID-19 in the short term, it's business in the long term, and it flip-flops between business and COVID-19. Then some of their challenges are equally concerns with the government. Number 2 is the economy, and then competition and talent management, both short-term and long-term, and then internal and external risks. So again, just a couple of questions for you guys to think through as you look through some of this data. Why is it important for you to understand both short-term and long-term challenges, no matter what size business you're in? Oftentimes, as business owners, we can get caught into the hustle and the bustle and producing and doing the work, as opposed to giving ourselves some time up to breathe and for air to think. So when we have a meeting with our customers, the number one thing I say is we're in a meeting to do 3 things. We're here to think about something, we're here to plan for something, and we're here to do something. Well, this meeting today that we're in for Med Week, for this crisis leadership for high growth businesses, this is the thinking meeting. I want you to think. That's it. Don't plan nothing. Don't do anything. Don't send an email. Think. Think about the data that you're looking at and think about how you can apply it to your business. What does the data tell you that you're looking at? What does this look like in your industry? So this is a middle market look at across multiple sectors. Have you looked at the data within your industry? And how does this help you shape your strategy? So for example, for us, we had to look back in March. I said, okay, people are going to have different needs, and even a crisis management company can become irrelevant in a crisis. So what are we going to do to make sure we're continuing to meet the needs of our customers? So back in March, we decided to focus on small business training that's provided to government and corporate employees, or excuse me, government and corporate organizations, where they hire us to develop e-learning training for their employees, for their small businesses, and for their suppliers. We pivoted 5 or 6 months ago. We're now starting to see the return of that pivot now. And so we had to take a look at what's happening in our market. Many crisis management and even products and folks who provide the technology to support the types of planning work that we do were laying off staff. Their customers were walking away because we didn't expect for the whole world to be in the same crisis at the same time. That was a risk to my industry and to my profession. And so I saw many folks like myself who have a lot of years of experience, but they were not busy doing anything. And so again, you have to continue to think about what are the needs of the customers, how are they changing, and how do we help and how do we get ahead of that curve? So if you're sitting here now and you're still kind of, thinking through how do we pivot, how do we stay ahead of the game, look 6 months down the line, right? What are some things that we expect will happen, and how do you think forward to kind of think through that process? So small business areas of financial concern. So I took a look at a Facebook report and Facebook and then the Small Business Roundtable. And it was a really good report to kind of talk about the impacts of small businesses in COVID-19. So this report surveyed about 86,000 small business owners, managers, and employees. And some were operational, some were no longer working because of the shutdowns from COVID-19. And what they asked them about were some of their biggest challenges that they experienced in the past with COVID-19, as well as what they expected to see as a challenge moving forward. They also surveyed them about family obligations and how it affected their ability to work, whether they had access to information about available resources. They asked them about long-term business survival strategies, and then what they thought about how this situation would at some point become hopeful. And so what I thought was pretty interesting were some of the quotes and some of the data points that they came back with. So what you'll see on the first graph here is a cash flow within the past 30 days. And so this is a survey to look at what were some of the cash flow concerns over a 30-day period. And as you can see, the top one at 41% was the outflow. So the money that was spent was greater than what was coming in. So that's always a challenge, right? The second thing that was tied neck and neck is the outflow was less than the inflow, or the outflow was about as same as the inflow. And so that right there can be a major risk to business. If we either don't have enough money that's coming in to meet the expenses, then the first thing is what are we going to cut to make sure that we can make the best decision for the business? Because that's our job at the end of the day. We have to make the right decisions for the company, right? And oftentimes we keep employees on for way too long, or we continue investing in things that don't make sense if we can't prove what the value is or what the ROI is. And so many of us, hopefully, we're taking some time to look and to project, what do I have coming in within the next 30 to 60 days? What's my cash flow projections? And then how do I manage or adjust what we're spending so that we can make sure that we're not operating at a negative every month, especially with the uncertainty around the pandemic. The other survey that was pretty interesting for this Facebook report was the areas of financial concern. So different companies express different concerns. So you'll see what was interesting was 43% of respondents had none of these concerns from a financial perspective. It may have been others, but second to that was employee wages and salary, accounts payable, and then lastly, rent or lease. So just thinking about, you know, if we don't have any cash coming in, how are we going to continue to pay for these expenses, and what does that look like? What was also interesting is that professional services and construction-based businesses reported that their expenses exceeded income for over 30 days in the pandemic. And about 41% of that chose to draw on their savings to help them manage that. So again, professional services and construction-based companies had expenses that exceeded income for over 30 days, and 41% were able to pull from savings to help them with that. However, many of them are still seeking some assistance. So I know on this call, we're largely professional services and construction-based companies. What are some ways that you guys were able to manage this successfully? So with that, I'm going to pull another poll for us. And we're going to go to poll 2, and I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. All right, we are live, and this poll just has 2 questions. So first question is, what are your financial concerns? And you can list multiple concerns that you have for your business. And then the second question is, what are the top emerging risks that you're facing in your business? And again, this is a multiple choice. So I'll give you guys a couple seconds. There's a few in here for you to look through, but I'm interested to see what you guys come back with and if they're the same that these folks have provided. All right, got about 2% that's voted. All right, now it's getting up there. I think last time we got to about 59%. So right now we're at 25%. %, 40%, almost at 60. Okay, looks like we're stopping at 42%. All right, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. All right, so top financial concerns on this call, 80% for employee wages and salaries, followed by expenses exceeding income. So that's really good insight for this call. And then the third concern is challenges with access to capital. And our second poll, what are the top emerging risks facing your business? 73%, the top risk is growth or expansion, which is good because risks can be good and it can be bad. Growth and expansion is great, but it also sucks cash out of your business, which is like oxygen. So it's about how do you manage growth. The second is followed by cash flow. I'm not surprised based upon growth and expansion being the top concern. And then the third is followed by an economic slowdown or a slow recovery. Awesome. It's really good insight. Okay. So what we would like to do is have you go into breakout rooms, but I don't believe that capability is set up. So what I would like for you guys to do is we would like to hear from you and understanding a couple of questions that you see here on this slide. What are some of your takeaways from the business update? Initial reactions, you can go ahead and put that in the chat and we can have a bit of a dialogue about that. If you want to talk about what you've done that's working, I'd love to be able to read some of those examples and share with the attendees we have on the call today. Or if you have questions, please feel free to add that to the chat as well. So I'll put a couple of these questions. I don't know if I can. Let's see here. You guys can see the question, so you should be able to add this into the chat feature. I'll give you a couple minutes to post. And again, just post in comments on what's your takeaway from the business update. What have you done that is working for your business? And what questions do you have? Okay, so far I don't have any updates yet, so no takeaways yet. Nothing that's working in anybody's business so far, and no questions yet. And I also don't believe I have the ability to add a chat. So if one of our amazing hosts, if you're able to send me a private message just to let me know if that's working, that'd be great. I do have Roland, who has raised a hand. So what I'd like to do, Roland, I'm going to see if I can allow you to talk. I don't know another way to work that. We're going to give it a try. All right, Roland.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
There are questions that are showing up already. So I don't know if there's some takeaways that some people have posted. Can you see it?
I cannot see it, but thank you.
So Ebony Stubbs says
this
takeaway.
Is Evelyne.
Okay.
We do have a couple questions. I'll let Roland go ahead and ask his questions, and then I'll read out to you the other questions that the other participants.
No, go ahead. I was just giving her a heads up that there's some stuff
okay.
in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate
go
it.
Ahead. No problem.
All right, so we do have a couple takeaways. So Ebony with great images, her takeaway, I like the reminder of thinking 6 months out, getting out of the week-to-week survival mode. I know that's a lot of people's concern. And then we have Marlon Smith. He says, I really like what you said regarding the importance of thinking ahead. Again, thinking ahead 6 months out of your future client needs. Anticipation is key so you can provide new solutions. And then he also asked a question, what is the best way to determine the needs of our clients?
Okay. I will come back to that. Any others, Evelyne?
No, that's it so far.
Okay, awesome. So good. I'm glad you guys were able to get something out of it. And I would definitely say, yes, I echo you in terms of thinking ahead. Like I mentioned, we work with a diverse set of businesses, and even the large companies to the small ones, we all are challenged with thinking ahead and getting ahead of the storm. We don't invest a lot in preparedness, but we do invest a lot in recovery and rebuilding. And that says a lot from a preparedness standpoint. Towards the end, we will talk about how to determine the needs of your clients, and I have a tool to help you do that. So stay put, and I'll give you the answer to that question. All right, so moving on into part 2 of our goal today, to provide some insights into a plan for recovery. So typically, when we hear the terms economic recovery, what that really means is recovery involves decisions and actions that are relative to you being able, or to your community, to being able to rebuild homes, to replace property, to resume employment, to restore businesses, and to permanently repair or rebuild an infrastructure after something has been damaged. And that damage can come from a soft crisis or a hard crisis. A soft crisis might be something that it's a little bit more hard to tangibly touch, like a cybersecurity vulnerability. It could be sexual abuse and misconduct within the workplace. That's what I would consider a soft crisis, right? And then your hard crises are going to be things like a natural disaster, a tornado, an explosion, things that you can tangibly see, touch, you can see and feel the damage. And so you're going to have different things that happen over the course of your business, and that can be both an internal and an external threat. However, the process of recovery is about balancing what's immediate to help return the community to some sense of normalcy, while also managing the long-term goal of reducing the future vulnerabilities within your communities. And so as you think about COVID-19, that's where we are, is we need to restore our communities to whatever normalcy means. And then we also need to do that with a forward-thinking long-term lens, so we don't find ourselves back in this situation and repeat history. And so the way in which we do that, a couple things I wanted to share with you as business owners is, number one, it's important for you to understand, when I hear the word recovery, what does that actually mean? And then number two, what is my role and what's the responsibility for me as a business owner? So we'll talk about those two things today before we get into our example. So first and foremost, the stages of recovery. So what's important to know here is that there is literally a process for recovery. And depending on where you're located, depending on the type of business that you're in, you can come in and out of these various stages until the recovery process is complete. So when you think about this, don't compare your business to another business if one is more prepared than the other, okay? Or if one of you is in a different stage of recovery than the other. So first and foremost, the stages of recovery start with a disaster assessment. So something bad happens, let's just say a Hurricane Katrina, because I think we can all remember that one. And so what happens after that is a disaster assessment. So let's assess what the real damage has been. So this is where we look at what are the victims' needs, what were some of the concerns from the people within the community. Some didn't have water, some didn't have a home, some didn't have schools to go back to, some didn't have transportation to get out of the affected area for weeks, right? So what are some of the victims' needs? What's the preliminary damage, right? So let's start to kind of quantify what's the cost of the damage. Whether that be we lost X number of buildings, whether that be X number of our roads are underwater, whatever we use to assess what the true cost of the damage is. How many businesses went out of business, right? Get that number down on paper and get that analysis done. What are some of the lessons learned that we can take from this damage assessment? So as a company, you should be doing your own assessment of the disaster or of the disruption. And then your government officials will also be doing that. And so what's always interesting in this process is government is tasked with communicating to businesses. But for those of you who serve both the private side of businesses as well as public sector, what we know is that the language of business and public sector folks are two different languages. And so that's always a challenge, is how do government officials communicate where we are in the process or the stages of recovery so that you understand what your role is and where you come into play in these different processes, okay? So phase one or stage one is the damage, is the disaster assessment. Stage two is about the short-term recovery process. And so that's taking a look at the impacted area, whether that be from a security perspective, whether it be looking at temporary shelter. So what can we do in the short term to make sure people have a place to live, to make sure people have a school to go to, or to make sure that people have healthcare, right? That's temporary things that we would do from a short-term recovery standpoint. We also start to look at how do we start to repair some of the things that have been damaged? What are some of the permits that we may need to release to help support that? What about from an infrastructure standpoint? How do we start to manage donations So oftentimes when there's a large disaster, you'll see an overwhelming response of donations and food and diapers and things like that. And that's great that there's an outpour from the community. But what's also important is that you have an entire donation management function from a public sector standpoint that's managing all of that to ensure that the resources are going to the people who need it most. And there's logistics and transportation that's involved with that, right? And then also disaster assistance. So what are some of the things that maybe some of these people may need to support their families? That includes the FEMA family assistance and some of the programs and initiatives they have post-disaster. So again, this is the second stage of recovery. This starts to get into the short-term recovery aspects. Then you have long-term reconstruction. And so this is really where economic development steps in. So your emergency managers, folks like myself, we are looking at the damage, the concerns, the vulnerabilities, and then now is when the relationship with economic development and your responders start to really work together to kind of think through, well, here's all the problems and the challenges. Now, how do we pair that with the long-term solution or strategy, and how does economic development get involved, right? So here we're looking at some of our infrastructure and how do we make sure that we help to make sure that our infrastructure and the things that we depend on, like water, sewer, bridges, roads, that they are resilient, meaning they can absorb whatever impact, whatever disruption has happened, and they can bounce back so we can continue to utilize those services to manage our personal lives and our business lives. This may also include historic preservation. So what are some things that may have been damaged from a historical perspective that we need to think about long-term? Building construction practices. What are some practices that we may have to implement or to create as a result of this crisis or this disruption? Environmental recovery. What does that look like? What are some of the environmental concerns that have come out of that? And how do we plan a long-term reconstruction with the environment in mind? Mental health and public health. So I know a lot during COVID-19, some of our customers haven't really considered the impact of our public health and what that's done to their workforce. But I think it's really important for us to understand that people have definitely been affected by this pandemic, and more so from a mental health perspective. There was about a 2-week period where every person I talked to had either thoughts of suicide or just was really depressed from the pandemic. And so I think it's important for us to consider that as we think about the stages of recovery. The last stage is about recovery management. So that is where you really start to get in the what I would call the project management office, right? So this is managing the recovery operation, because it is going to take time and it takes years. Typically in America, recovery is a multi-billion-dollar or multi-trillion-dollar industry. Again, data shows that most US companies spend less of an investment in preparedness, and they spend more money on the back end recovering from the thing that you did not want to prepare for. So for example, I had a client, she was hit with a cybersecurity breach that cost her over $500,000, and she was less than $1 million company. It would have cost her $20,000 to prepare. Instead, she paid the full $500,000 on the back end. And that also cost her her reputation, it cost her the customers, and it cost her the operational downtime. So it was really more than the $500,000 cost. So that's what I mean when I say managing that recovery process. This is really about making sure that the recovery is going the way that we've intended it to go, and that we're managing it, and we have people that are responsible for this. So these are the 4 stages of recovery that you as business owners should be aware of as you think through and navigate your business. So one last poll before we get into roles and responsibilities and our quick survey towards the end. So I'm going to go ahead and launch poll number 3. And this poll is really quick. Just want to get a feel for what stage of recovery do you think your business is in? And again, it's multiple choice because you can be in multiple. And then the second question is, what stage of recovery do you think your local government is in? Got about 9% voted. So I'm going to give you a couple more seconds. Up to 15%. 21. Okay. We're a little over 30%. That's good. Hope it keeps climbing. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll here and we'll share the results. All right, so the majority of us on this call feel like our businesses are at 33%. We're either long-term reconstruction or we're somewhere between the short-term recovery phase, or we're just not sure yet, which that's perfectly fine. And then the majority of us think that most of our local governments, and most of us are in the city of Charlotte, we think that our government is at a short-term recovery, while 33% of us are not sure. So that's good. It gives some insight in terms of, you know, what we think versus what they may think that we know. So for those of you who are in local government, that might help to influence some of the conversations. So the last piece we'll talk about in terms of recovery is roles and responsibilities. So what's important is everybody has a role, right? And if we don't contribute and we don't play a part in our role, then the overall economic recovery will suffer. So at a very high level, there's three types of roles. There's the role of the household, there's the role of the business, and there's the role of government. And so from a business perspective, the role is really for you to help restore your company and to help support your employees. The faster that you can generate revenue and the faster that you can create jobs, the more we will move our economy forward. So some of your responsibilities may be taking care of your people. It may be innovating, creating new partnerships or relationships that you haven't considered before. It may be envisioning what the future may look like without holding on to previous examples or previous things that may have happened in history. From my perspective, 2020 is a game changer. And so being able to look forward about, well, this could happen in 2020 and how would this change my business if this actually happened? Again, the faster that you are on your feet as businesses, the economy will come back. And I say that because whether you're a small business or whether you're a medium middle market business, what we know is that you employ more people than large businesses combined. So it is critical. You are critical to the economic recovery of our economy from a national perspective and a global perspective. And I cannot stress that enough. So when we wake up every day, we have a responsibility as business owners to truly think about how are we going to figure this out. From a household perspective, that includes many things. It could be finding another form of shelter, depending on what the crisis or the disaster is. It can be clothing, food, furniture, appliances, time for insurance claims, applying for loans, maybe searching for jobs if you're one of those people that have been laid off. So there are things that people within a household perspective that they have responsibilities for, right? And then also thinking about if you're in a low income neighborhood versus those who may be more affluent, how that may change. And so considering the types of people that you have within your organization and what their households are personally going through. And again, I do recommend the Facebook study that we just referenced a couple slides ago to kind of help you think through what the personal impact has been. And lastly, from a government perspective, their role is to influence, it's to understand the needs of the community, it's to demand action for leadership, it's knowing what to do, having the ability to act from a response perspective and a recovery perspective, and to truly lead that initiative with their community and communicate, right? So we all have various roles within the recovery process. It's important that number one, we know the roles, and then number two, you do your part. All right, so that's a little bit on insights to plan for recovery. The last,
Vanessa, we did have another question in the chat. I just wanted to just make sure we touched on that as we go into the next thing. And Anna wants to know, what are your thoughts on where we as an economy will be 6 months to a year from now?
Yeah. Personally, I think that from an economics perspective, that more people, that there will be a greater divide between those who are wealthy and those who are not. I think homelessness will go up in our local communities. I think I personally believe within a 2 to 5 year time frame, if that we could start to see a consolidation of governments. So if your local government is no longer able to sustain itself, I could see a merger or consolidation happening across the country. So what happens if a city of Charlotte consolidates into Mecklenburg County, and then the 6 towns that surround it also consolidate? What does that mean? What happens, from a resource perspective, from a services standpoint? So that's kind of what I think about. I'm also in the field of Homeland Security and emergency management, so that might sound a little daunting. I'd be interested to see what you guys think, and we can listen to some of those chat remarks towards the end of this session. So I think I have about maybe 5 more minutes, so I'll try to get through this response guide as quickly as possible. So what we've created is a 5-step response guide for businesses like you to be able to manage any type of disruption that you're faced with. And it starts with first analyzing your environment, identifying opportunities, evaluating your options and your path, and then implementing, and overall always making sure you are communicating. So the first question was, what is the best way to determine the needs of my clients? And this is a chart that I use to answer that question. So I put down, who are my stakeholders? So for this particular example, the question that I posed was a question that my customer posed to me this week, which was, how do we manage civil unrest? Your question may be, what's the best way to determine the needs of our clients? Regardless, we take this sheet and we look and we list out, who are our stakeholders? What are their needs? What are their constraints? What are our capabilities based upon each of these stakeholders? And what are our constraints based upon each of these stakeholders? And this has been a game changer for me. And also when I sit down and I have a phone conversation, that's the first thing I ask them. What are your needs for the next 3 months to the next 6 months? What are your constraints? And what's interesting is what we assume their constraints to be versus what they say when we just ask the question. So I would definitely say, ask them specifically, what are their needs? What are their constraints? And use this chart as a guide. I won't walk through specifics of this example, but again, a question posed to me this week from my client was, how do we manage civil unrest? And this was for a retail customer. So we're putting together this same framework to help kind of think through that question. The second step of this process is to identify your opportunities and your threats. On the left-hand side, you'll see a number of risk factors. You can change these risk factors to align more to your business, but the intent is to really challenge you and to help you think about, based upon these various risk factors, what are the opportunities, what are the threats, so that we can come into this with an informed perspective to help guide whatever decision we decide to make. Once you understand those things, then it's time to brainstorm and evaluate what are all of the options that I have. So again, in this example, we're talking about what do we do about civil unrest, but what are all the options and actions that you can take? And then you use this feasibility chart on the right. And if it's in the lower left-hand quadrant, if it's not feasible and it has a low impact, you probably don't want to spend your money or your time there. So this automatically helps you to prioritize and think about your investments. It might be highly feasible, but also a low impact. Is that really where you want to spend your time? Or it could be highly feasible with high impact. And that's what we really want to focus our time and attention on. So just kind of thinking about what are some of the actions you can take, and then where does it fall from a feasibility and an impact perspective. Of course, you want to implement. What gets measured gets done. So we're all about who's doing what by when, and what happens if they don't do it, right? So holding people accountable is really critical. And then lastly, how do you craft your message? So we took a page out of the change management book. What do you want people to know? What do you want people to feel? And what do you want people to do? And oftentimes we think about, before we communicate, what do I want people to know before I send this email or before I say something? What do I want them to feel when I'm done talking? But maybe what we don't think about enough is, what do I physically want people to do? And this part is critical. So before you communicate anything, especially in times of crisis, I would highly encourage you to go through this framework and to really think about, what do I want people to do? An example of when this was used was when COVID-19 first started. A customer had to lay off their whole workforce. And so she went through this process of, what do I want people to know, feel, and do? And that completely changed her approach for how she approached her staff. And the results that she got was amazing. So number one, they understood her message. Number two, they felt what she wanted them to feel. And then more importantly, they did what she wanted them to do, because she thought through that, and that helped to influence her message. So with that, I'm going to pause to see if we have any questions. And Evelyne, thank you so much for helping me out here. And as you guys are filling in some of the questions, we also value your feedback. So if you want to put into the chat what you liked about today's session, what you wished, and what you learned, while we chat through some of the questions with a little bit of time we have.
All right, so we have one more question. It's from Marlon Smith. He says, during your opening, you shared how large percentage of the big companies are holding on to their cash. As a small business owner, I believe this is the time to invest and innovate, because this is an opportunity to move forward. Being small businesses, we have the advantage of making quicker decisions and pivoting faster than the bureaucracy of bigger businesses. What do you think?
So I think that I agree with you on that. We definitely have to innovate and think ahead of where they're going and what their needs are going to be. However, I think you can't invest if you don't have the cash. So what I have learned about business, because we've had our own financial crises, literally I had one problem that cost me our annual revenue. So I know exactly what it's like to go through a financial issue and really not know if you're going to be able to come out on the other side. So what I would also say is, you can't give what you don't have. And at the end of the day, if our income exceeds, if our expenses exceed our income, then we need to rethink about the business model. We need to think about our overhead and how do we reduce or change what we're spending money on to reflect where we're trying to go. And so I totally agree that, business owners can be more nimble and take a different approach, but we also have to do so cautiously, because cash is king. Yeah. Any more questions, Evelyne? Nope. Okay. All right. So lastly, if you would like some time to chat, my email is vmathews@asfalisadvisors.com. I'm also available on LinkedIn. You can also download the templates from today's presentation through this link here, info.asfalissadvisors.com/en-us/medweek. And we may be able to send that link out to you post this session, since I'm unable to post in the chat today. I co-own a podcast called Business Resilience Decoded. If you're a podcaster, please feel free to follow us on iTunes or Google Play. And if you're on social media, I provided our social media handles as well. So with that, that's all I have for today's session. Evelyne?
Thank you, everyone. We certainly appreciate you joining us today. Great information from Vanessa. I really encourage all of you to continue to follow up with her, some great information, so that maybe she can kind of break down some of those bullet points. We definitely have a lot of feedback on people saying that they love the concept of thinking forward and preparing for the future. So reach out to Vanessa. And again, thank you for joining us for this session of MedWeek today.